I'm here today with Graham Fulford of the Graham Fulford Charitable Trust, and they are leading a large-scale research project. It's really important that as many men as possible take part. Graham, tell me, what's the purpose of the research?
The overall objective of the research is to prove conclusively that there is a case for a screening programme in the UK. The evidence is out there and we believe the responses from this research programme will confirm that.
Is prostate cancer one of the biggest causes of death in men?
It's the second biggest cancer in men, apparently, after lung cancer. And I understand that only around 8% of men in the UK are normally tested each year for prostate cancer, which is very low compared to Europe generally, and is probably why, or one of the major reasons why, the UK has one of the highest incidence of metastatic disease at diagnosis in Europe.
It's a common cancer, it's one of the most common cancers out of all of them, and therefore if we can make a difference it would be a substantial contribution.
I go back to the adage of you die with prostate cancer, not from it. Well, that's not the case. There's lots of men dying of prostate cancer every year in the UK and across the world.
If you get aggressive prostate cancer, it's a horrible disease, and it's definitely one to be prevented if we can.
We lose about 10,000 people a year, 12,000 people a year now, I think it is. So about 1,000 people a month with prostate cancer, a cancer that's eminently treatable if you catch it early. But we don't have a system of spotting early enough whether people have cancer.
That's right, there is no national screening programme for prostate cancer, and we believe there's strong evidence out there that there should be.
At the moment in the UK, we don't have a centrally controlled screening programme with appropriate governance and controls. So what are we going to do in the UK about this situation? I think there are two things that we can do as charities. We can certainly raise awareness. We can run screening for as many men who wish to come forward and make use of it. And then we can collect the data. And we need to put this data into a context where we can use it to, if you like, improve the case and better advocate the case for more PSA testing.
Why should men have a PSA test?
It's important to have a PSA test in our opinion because whilst it's not directly designed to diagnose prostate cancer, it will help diagnose various prostate conditions which will, if treated, improve the quality of life.
It saved my life having a PSA test. Just the first test revealed that I had a very high reading.
PSA testing is the only means at the moment of discovering whether there's any problem with your prostate.
So PSA stands for prostate specific antigen, and it's a blood test. It measures a protein in the blood that is used as a marker to assess risk of prostate cancer. So although it's specific to the prostate, it's not specific to cancer per se.
So it's not a perfect test, but it's the only means at the moment of spotting in advance whether somebody may have prostate cancer.
Certainly, I suggest that to my patients that it's worth having an annual PSA and understanding what your PSA is.
Having worked with a PSA test for years, is it fair to say that it's time to take what you've learned to a whole new level?
Yes, we believe the information we've gleaned over the last 15 years now forms the perfect basis for a wide-ranging research project.
Theresa May talked about 4 years ago about the need for research to establish the risk factors on prostate cancer.
The earlier it is treated, the more likelihood there is of a cure, because if you can catch it when the cancer is still contained within the gland, it's very, very treatable.
The expectation, if you catch prostate cancer early, is that 100% of those men will still be alive 5 years after the event. If you leave it until they're showing symptoms, you're likely to find that 5-year rate drops to about 50%.
Long-term trial evidence, excellent long-term trial evidence, in Europe and in North America has shown that we can cut that death rate by a half or even more.
Historically, PSA has been badly judged as a marker of cancer because the diagnostic test that flows on from PSA testing used to be a blind biopsy of the prostate, which had its own flaws as a diagnostic test. So that those blind biopsies used to miss cancer, and it was also an invasive test, and it's got risks associated with it.
Well, the situation now is radically different in that although PSA still will produce so-called false positive and false negative tests, they're really minimal compared with the benefit we derive, because we can now tell the difference between non-aggressive prostate cancer and aggressive prostate cancer, and we treat the aggressive ones.
Why are the current attitudes inadequate? Why don't they go far enough?
We believe the results of the research will reinforce the argument that is already in the marketplace, as it were, about the findings of people having regular PSA tests.
I think that's the right way to put it. It's an attitude. It's not something that is currently based on scientific evidence.
Really, not much is changing at the national level, and that's despite quite a lot of progress that's been made in, changing the balance of harms and benefits for screening for prostate cancer, such that now there's quite a strong case that can be made for, looking at developing a national screening program for prostate cancer in the men at higher risk.
And we're just not making use of this tool that we have at our hands, a simple blood test.
Men have a PSA. I like the idea they have a PSA, because if it's normal, that's very reassuring. And if it's very high, we need to know about that. And then you get these men that are slightly high or marginally elevated PSAs, where we do an MRI scan, and 50% of those MRI scans are likely to be benign. Again, you've got a non-invasive test which you can reassure the patient, or you can reassure the GP, reassure myself to say, look, okay, there doesn't look like there's any significant disease here.
The problem is that we're just not seeing enough men soon enough, whilst they're still, or at least whilst their cancers are still in a treatable state.
But where the whole system falls down is the GPs.
General practitioners don't get the specialist information that we as urologists get, so they're unaware of the advances, and furthermore, it's not their fault, but they've not been taught how to use PSA to its best advantage.
It's something of a lottery as to whether your doctor will give you a PSA test, even if you ask for it.
And at the moment, a lot of chaps are going along to GPs and requesting a PSA test, and it's being turned down on various grounds, mostly outdated, but the result is that chaps are not getting PSA tests. And it's men in their 40s and 50s and early 60s that we need to be screening.
Some of the problems that have been known about for 20 years have gradually been chipped away at, and we have an opportunity going forwards over the next 5 years to really develop a national program. I'm sure of that.
50% of men presenting with prostate cancer in the UK at the present time are still presenting with advanced disease.
The new drugs for prostate cancer that have come out over the last decade are fantastic, and they work very, very well, but they're not cheap.
It's been estimated that if you have an early prostate cancer picked up as a result of screening, the cost to the service is about €30,000. On the other hand, if you present with late disease, go through a number of years of palliation using really quite expensive chemotherapy drugs and various other techniques that we can successfully employ to keep people alive for anything up to 10 years with advanced disease. Unfortunately, you will eventually die of advanced disease, and that will cost the exchequer about €300,000. Those are the estimates that we have from Europe.
I think there's still a historical view from prostate cancer that we don't we don't need to look too hard, because we're finding disease that's not going to be clinically significant, and therefore we're over treating. And I think that has changed a lot in recent years.
What Graham is leading on is really community-based testing using a simple system of PSA and free to total PSA, and more recently with the COVID issue, he has developed home testing. And this is an exciting venture because many screening programs are doing the same thing. They're trying to take the screening now to the participants.
I think what is probably going to push the case for screening most is clinical practice. The use of MRI scans to be able to differentiate between clinically aggressive cancers and the non-aggressive. And when we've got tools like that, which we're now using in routine clinical practice, it seems to me that the arguments against screening are fast disappearing.
Who's your key collaborator?
We're working with Ken Muir from Manchester University, who we worked with back in 2012 when we had a paper written and produced of the analysis of the work we've done in our first 7 years of operation. And clearly it's now much, much wider, and they're very excited at the prospect this extra information will give them.
I'm an epidemiologist. My background's in statistics and in biology and in genetics. So I evaluate numbers, and pleased to say that data and genetics are coming together now to refine screening programs. The conventional way in which this would be evaluated is through the National Screening Committee, but the bar is set very high, quite rightly so. Before you implement a national system, you have to have very strong evidence. Screening programs do involve potential harms because we're dealing with healthy people and inviting them to have an assessment, and we need to be extremely confident that they won't do more harm than good. So what the approach we've been developing with Graham over the past 10-15 years is what we call the riskman approach. And riskman is simply a way of combining a small number of risk factors together into one algorithm. And what the algorithm does is it takes some of the risk profiling from different tests and combines it into one stronger test. And this is in keeping with what's going on in breast cancer, for example, and in other cancers. The algorithm is based around age, around PSA, around free to total, and more excitingly, even than that, there's now initiatives to include genetic markers and epigenetic markers. And these biological markers are known to stratify men into their underlying risk, on which we can monitor their day-to-day risk using these biomarkers as well.
Who are the kinds of people you'd like to complete the questionnaire?
As many men as possible. Certainly all the people that received a red or amber letter from us in the period 2010 to 2020, we'll be right into all of those. Also men with a high green score in the upper quartile, and we're also throwing it open to all prostate cancer tackle members, people at Genesis Care who treated over the years, and in fact anybody in the community out there who wants to help. The more people that respond, the better the research will be, and the more solidly based will be the findings.
Are you expecting most people to respond online?
A significant number of men, particularly in our area, in the deprived part of our area, don't have access to computers and the internet.
Given the modern world and given the cost effectiveness of it, we hope that a large element of people will respond online. But we want to make it very, very clear that there are other options available. What is absolutely essential is that we get a high uptake of people we want to, so they can do it either by filling in a form, which we'll send to them quite happily with a stamped address envelope. They can talk it through on the telephone in confidence and we'll enter it, or they can at least give us brief details in a form that we'll provide for them. So one way or another, we can get feedback.
How many men would you ideally like to recruit?
Ideally, our dream target is up to 50,000 men, and we do know that just looking at the cancer survivors and the people on our database, we've got at least 10,000 to start with. And because we've tested literally 120,000 men or so since 2010, if a reasonable element of those greens reply, then we're going to get somewhere near it. And it is open to the wider community as well. Part of the objective of this film is to invite anybody that's ever had a PSA test to engage with us.
Is there a deadline?
It's a 2-year project. We'd like to get as many through as we can in 2021 so that we can follow it up again in 2022. The more people that engage, the more valid the research, and the more people are going to sit up and hopefully take notice of what it says. The ultimate objective at the end of the day is to ensure that there is a change of attitude and that prostate cancer screening becomes as normal in the UK as breast cancer screening currently is.
Thanks so much, Graham. Well, there you are, a really worthwhile research project. If you're asked, do take part.